Picture this. You're a Norman knight in 1066, mounted on your prized warhorse, charging toward what you think are defenseless English foot soldiers. Suddenly, a 7-foot-tall Viking warrior steps forward, wielding a weapon so terrifying that your horse rears back in terror. This isn't just any axe, this is the Dane axe, and today you're going to discover why it became medieval Europe's most feared anti-cavalry weapon. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can an axe stop a charging horse? Well, stick around, because what you're about to learn will completely change how you see medieval warfare forever. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Norman cavalry feared these weapons more than any sword or spear, and why this knowledge could give you a completely new perspective on how underdogs can overcome seemingly impossible odds, even today. Before we dive into the brutal reality of how these weapons worked, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to face down a charging warhorse with nothing but a long-handled axe? Most people can't even imagine it. But for the Anglo-Saxon and Viking warriors of 1066, this wasn't imagination. This was life or death. You see, the year 1066 wasn't just about the Battle of Hastings that you learned about in school. It was the climax of centuries of warfare where infantry had to develop devastating tactics to survive against mounted knights. And here's what's fascinating. The Dane axe wasn't just a weapon. It was a psychological warfare tool that could break the spirit of an entire cavalry charge before it even reached the battle line. Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about a 1,000-year-old axe? Here's why. The principles behind the Dane axe's effectiveness against cavalry reveal timeless truths about warfare, strategy, and human psychology that are just as relevant today as they were in medieval times. Whether you're facing challenges in your career, your relationships, or any area where you feel outmatched, understanding how our ancestors turned disadvantage into advantage can give you powerful insights. So what exactly made the Dane axe so special? Let me paint you a picture that will help you understand why this weapon struck fear into the hearts of medieval warriors. Imagine holding a weapon that's nearly as tall as you are. We're talking 6 to 7 feet of ash wood handle, topped with a crescent-shaped steel blade that could measure up to 12 inches across. This wasn't your typical woodcutter's axe. This was a precision-engineered killing machine designed for one primary purpose: stopping cavalry charges dead in their tracks. Here's what you need to understand about the physics involved. And trust me, this gets incredible. When a 200-pound warrior swings a Dane axe with a 6-foot handle, the blade tip is moving at roughly 100 miles per hour at impact. That's enough force to cleave through chainmail, leather, and even damage plate armor. But here's where it gets even more interesting for you. The weapon's length gave warriors a critical advantage that most people completely miss. Think about this. A mounted knight's lance is typically 10 to 12 feet long, right? But a Dane axe warrior didn't need to match that reach. They just needed to get inside that lance point and deliver a devastating blow to either the horse or rider. And because of the axe's design, they could do something that no other infantry weapon could do effectively. They could strike upward at mounted targets with devastating power. Can you imagine the courage it took to stand firm against a cavalry charge, knowing you had just one chance to make your swing count? This psychological element is something we'll explore more, because it reveals incredible insights about human nature under extreme pressure. Now, here's where the story gets really fascinating, and I want you to really think about this. How do you think medieval foot soldiers actually used these massive axes against charging horses? Most people imagine wild, berserker-like swinging, but the reality was far more tactical and terrifying. Professional Dane axe warriors, and yes, they were specialists, employed specific techniques that were passed down through generations of Viking and Anglo-Saxon military tradition. Picture this scenario and really try to visualize what I'm describing. You're part of a shield wall, standing shoulder to shoulder with your fellow warriors. A line of Norman cavalry is thundering toward you, their lances lowered, expecting to punch through your formation like it's made of paper. But you know something they don't. You've trained for this exact moment. Here's the key tactic that you need to understand. Dane axe warriors didn't swing wildly at horses. They targeted specific points with surgical precision. The primary target? The horse's front legs, just above the knee joint. A well-placed strike here would instantly cripple the animal, sending both horse and rider tumbling in a catastrophic fall that could break bones and crush armor. But wait, it gets even more strategic. Do you know what happens when the first horse in a cavalry charge goes down? It creates a domino effect that can destroy an entire cavalry formation. Horses behind can't stop in time, riders get thrown, and what started as an organized charge becomes a chaotic mess of wounded animals and dismounted knights. Now here's what I want you to think about. This same principle applies to challenges you face today. Sometimes the most effective way to handle an overwhelming force isn't to meet it head-on with equal force, but to identify its critical weakness and strike there with precision. Whether it's a business competitor, a personal challenge, or any situation where you're outmatched, the Dane axe teaches us that strategic thinking often beats brute force. But here's what most historians don't talk about, and this is absolutely crucial for you to understand. The Dane axe's greatest power wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Think about this from the horse's perspective. Yes, the horse's perspective. War horses were trained to charge into battle, but they weren't stupid animals. A horse could see and hear a Dane axe warrior long before impact. The sight of a 7-foot warrior wielding a massive gleaming axe, often accompanied by terrifying war cries, could cause even the best trained war horse to shy away at the last second. Here's something that will blow your mind. There are documented accounts of entire cavalry charges being disrupted not by actual combat, but by horses refusing to approach Dane axe formations. The psychological impact was so severe that some Norman commanders had to completely rethink their cavalry tactics when facing these weapons. Now, I want you to consider this. How many times in your own life has the fear of consequences been more powerful than the actual consequences themselves? The Dane axe warriors understood something that modern psychology has proven. Perception can be more powerful than reality. But the psychological warfare worked both ways. Can you imagine what it took for an infantry soldier to stand firm against a cavalry charge? The sound of hoofbeats, the ground shaking beneath your feet, the sight of armored warriors bearing down on you at full speed. This required incredible mental fortitude. The Dane axe wasn't just a weapon, it was a confidence booster that gave warriors the psychological edge they needed to stand their ground. This principle is just as relevant today. When you're facing intimidating challenges, whether it's a difficult conversation, a career change, or any situation that seems overwhelming, having the right tools and mindset can give you the confidence to stand firm when others would retreat. Now let's talk about the most famous example of Dane axes in action, the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And I want you to pay close attention here, because what happened reveals some incredible insights about leadership, tactics, and how small advantages can determine the outcome of seemingly impossible situations. Here's what you need to understand about Hastings. This wasn't just a battle between English and Normans. This was a clash between two completely different military philosophies. William the Conqueror's Normans relied heavily on mounted knights and archers. Harold Godwinson's Anglo-Saxons fought primarily as heavy infantry, with Dane axes being their elite weapon of choice. Now picture this. You're King Harold's Huscarls, his elite bodyguards standing at the top of Senlac Hill. You've just fought and won a brutal battle against the Vikings at Stamford Bridge just 3 weeks earlier. You're tired, but you're also battle-hardened and confident in your weapons and tactics. Here's where it gets fascinating. The Anglo-Saxon shield wall, anchored by Dane axe warriors, initially dominated the battlefield. Norman cavalry charges were repeatedly thrown back with heavy casualties. Contemporary accounts describe Norman horses being literally cut in half by these massive axes. Can you imagine the terror this must have inspired in the Norman ranks? But here's the crucial lesson for you, and this applies to every competitive situation you'll ever face. Having superior tactics and weapons isn't enough if you can't maintain discipline under pressure. The Anglo-Saxons made a critical error that cost them everything. When rumors spread that William had been killed, some of the shield wall broke formation to pursue retreating Normans. This gave the Norman cavalry the opening they needed. What followed was a masterclass in how quickly tactical advantages can disappear. Once the shield wall was broken, the Dane axes lost much of their effectiveness. Individual warriors, no matter how skilled, couldn't stand against coordinated cavalry charges without the support of their formation. This teaches us something vital about teamwork and strategy that applies directly to your life today. Individual excellence means nothing without coordinated effort and disciplined execution. Whether you're part of a sports team, a business organization, or any group effort, the moment people start acting as individuals rather than as a unit, you become vulnerable to opponents who maintain their coordination. Now, here's what happened after Hastings that most people never learn about, and this part of the story reveals some incredible insights about adaptation and survival that you can apply to your own challenges. The Norman conquest didn't immediately end the use of Dane axes. In fact, Norman chroniclers continued to describe these weapons with a mixture of respect and fear for decades after 1066. What's fascinating is how military technology evolves in response to threats. The Normans began developing specialized tactics and equipment specifically designed to counter Dane axe formations. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn that I want you to really think about. As medieval warfare evolved, so did the weapons. The rise of better armor, crossbows, and eventually gunpowder gradually made the traditional Dane axe less effective. But its core principles, reach, power, and psychological impact, never disappeared. They simply evolved into new forms. You can see echoes of Dane axe tactics in later medieval weapons like the halberd and billhook, which combined axe blades with spear points specifically for anti-cavalry work. Even today, modern military anti-tank weapons operate on similar principles, identifying the weakness of a superior force and delivering precise, devastating strikes. Here's what this teaches us about adaptation that applies directly to your life. When the environment changes, successful people don't abandon their core strengths. They find new ways to apply the same fundamental principles. The Vikings and Anglo-Saxons who survived the Norman conquest weren't the ones who gave up their warrior culture entirely, but those who adapted their skills to new circumstances. This is incredibly relevant whether you're facing changes in your career, your industry, or any area of life where old methods no longer work as effectively. The key isn't to abandon everything you've learned, but to identify the timeless principles behind your successes and find new ways to apply them. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is all fascinating history, but what does it actually mean for my life today? This is where the Dane axe teaches us some of the most valuable lessons about strategy, psychology, and overcoming seemingly impossible odds. First, let's talk about the David versus Goliath principle that the Dane axe embodies. When you're facing a larger, more powerful opponent, whether that's a competitor in business, a personal challenge that seems overwhelming, or any situation where you're clearly the underdog, the Dane axe approach teaches us to look for asymmetric advantages. Think about it this way. A mounted knight had advantages in mobility, reach, and psychological impact, but he also had vulnerabilities. His horse could be injured, his mobility became a liability in close quarters, and his elevated position made certain angles of attack impossible for him to defend against. Dane axe warriors succeeded by identifying and exploiting these specific vulnerabilities rather than trying to match strength with strength. How can you apply this principle? When facing any overwhelming challenge, ask yourself, what are the hidden vulnerabilities in this seemingly superior force? What advantages do I have that might not be immediately obvious? Sometimes being smaller, more agile, or more desperate can actually be strengths if you know how to use them. Second, there's the psychological warfare aspect. Dane axes work partially because they look terrifying and created doubt in the minds of opponents. In your professional life, sometimes projecting confidence and capability can be just as important as actually having those qualities. This isn't about being dishonest. It's about understanding that perception shapes reality in human interactions. Third, there's the teamwork lesson from Hastings. Individual excellence without coordination is vulnerable to organized mediocrity. Whether you're leading a team or part of one, remember that maintaining formation and supporting each other often matters more than having the most talented individuals. Finally, there's the adaptation principle. The most successful cultures and individuals are those who maintain their core strengths while adapting to changing circumstances. What are your core strengths and how can you apply them to new challenges? So was the Dane axe an anti-horse terror weapon? Absolutely. But it was much more than that. It was a symbol of how strategic thinking, psychological warfare, and coordinated teamwork can help underdogs overcome seemingly impossible odds. The next time you're facing a challenge that seems too big, too powerful, or too overwhelming, remember the Dane axe warriors of 1066. They didn't have better armor, faster horses, or superior numbers. What they had was a clear understanding of their enemy's weaknesses, the right tools for the job, and the courage to stand firm when others would retreat. Now, I want to hear from you. What's your cavalry charge? What seemingly overwhelming challenge are you facing? And how might you apply these medieval strategies to find your own asymmetric advantage? Drop a comment below and let's discuss it. And if you found these historical insights as fascinating as I do, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're diving into another brutal medieval weapon that changed the course of history, the English longbow and how it revolutionized warfare at Agincourt. Trust me, you won't want to miss that story. Remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding timeless principles that can guide us through our own battles today. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring life in the dark ages.